I hear back from them about 1982. And I proved that, these are simple things. But you see, we're not talking about advanced mathematics here. We are actually talking about
quite simple.
Pardon?
Well, quite simple, that things don't add up, really. As simple as you can make it.
Yes, but there's the things that don't add up, and then there's the only way that they do add up. In other words, in truth, an actual economy eradicates all redundant costs, allows us to monetize everything that we would want to monetize, and sustain the whatever extents of prosperity we are desire and are convicted to producing. You see, and then in the end, then all that a true economy is an accounting system. As we all know, in accounting, there's only one legitimate process. You're keeping a record of everything. The same rules apply to anything in justifying creditworthiness, for instance.
Yeah, a new method doesn't change the fact.
Right. Yes, or an obfuscation of realities which you must adhere to doesn't change the fact, and it has further ramifications. You know, when a banking system merely intervenes upon all our commerce, merely to issue evidence of our promissory obligations to each other, that doesn't negate the fact that there's only one life cycle of a promissory obligation which can possibly sustain the integrity of the currency. Now, is it a question whether or not we should maintain the integrity of the currency? We can answer that very quickly. Why? Because if the value of money goes up, or the value of money goes down, or it doesn't represent any longer the original obligation, how are we possibly fulfilling the obligation in different units of different value? Someone is, no matter what case, instant, or moment in a case where the integrity of the currency is not immutable, where it has changed an iota, someone is offended and someone benefits unjustly without having contributed anything to the pool of wealth. They have a greater share of it. You see? And this is not a principle we can ever justify if we are advocates of true free enterprise, because true free enterprise is really about, I understand this is just an assertion, but I could go on for days about this. True free enterprise is about just reward for production. If I build a house, I own a house. You know, if I build a piece of equipment, that's my equipment. You see? Now, we could, you know, I notice you say in your interview that you might be criticized for insisting that, you know, the bank is preserved and that these so-called financial people have this new role as a marketplace where lenders and borrowers are brought together. But when you say that, you know, I have a whole lot of questions in my head, and you know, if I would have been a participant in that discussion, I would say, wait a minute, fellas, you know, you just said lenders and borrowers. Are you telling me that this person that borrows this money through this marketplace now doesn't have a debt? You've been advocating debt-free money. How are you abiding by your definition? You see, do you do any software development?
No, not personally. I mean, we have programmers as part of our business. So.
Yeah. Well, software engineering, and I don't mean that all people adhere to, you know, the principles of what we might call a master programmer. That is, whatever work you gave them, which involved any, you know, their skill set, they would turn around and produce not only the best implementation of processes which served your purposes, they would see any flaws in your purposes because their work would be so intensive, and this software would never even fail. You would never find a bug in it. That's what I would call a master programmer. In other words, if you give them a simple problem which has a definite ideal, which is almost always the case, they come up with that directly as a routine process of approaches to their work. And one thing that software engineers are very inclined to do, and the better of whom are exceedingly skilled and likely to produce an implementation without errors is they're very good at when you present an issue immediately envisioning the issue to all of its relevant extents, because in no other way can they succeed at what they do. So if we, in truth in life, no matter what you do, design the first airplane that flies, true, you are not going to perfect airfoils. You won't necessarily perfect the position, design, number of controlling surfaces which might be ideal to flight. But unless you come close enough that everything works without possible aberration or anomaly, you're going to crash your plane, possibly in the first flight. It's definitely in the first flight. If in the first flight, a control surface is required to do a thing which the plane must succeed in doing to prevent you from losing control of the plane. It's as simple as that. So, in truth in life, whenever we come up with, whenever we excel at anything, we account for the relevant issues, at least in a sufficiently conclusive way. But in very, very simple things in life, especially when those simple things bear upon everything that every one of us does. At some time in our life we're employed, unless we can be employed so long that we actually earn enough to sustain that standard of living through our retired or unemployed years, then we will have deterioration of our standard of living, which is perhaps even wholly destructive to us. So on and so forth. Unless we account for all these issues, we will fail on the hugest scales, and of course we've discovered the fatal flaws of the present obfuscation of the currency, which has been imposed upon us by the central banking systems of the world. Now, excuse me, how do we fix these things? Many people have resisted my work for 40 years. I regularly encounter people who believe that there's got to be a hole in it. There's no such thing as anything that's mathematically perfect. At the same time, the same person might advocate that something else is a solution. What that tells you is that they've compromised their standards, that whatever they say might be solution is as good a solution to them, while they resist without any conclusive disproof or even an effort to do so of an actual solution. So these are rather preposterous ideas that we might follow.
When you say the solution, it's probably important to define the goal there. What is the goal? Are you talking about a money system that works, where there's no inflation and deflation?
Well, for one thing, yes, absolutely. All things that you've mentioned so far, which fall precisely into these three categoric faults, which are long tested. You know, they've been pitted against, you know, leading intellectuals of the other side, and I can give you examples of, you know, let's say G. Edward Griffin, for instance, or William B. Ryan. Generally, anyone who's attempted to attack my proposition that there is one and one only integral solution for the categoric faults of any prospective economy. Generally, all that they ever try to attack is, on the contrary, not my proof of singular solution, but my proof of inevitable failure. And this shows a flaw in thinking itself. What they're trying to prove in the case of G. Edward Griffin a few years ago, and William B. Ryan, for instance, he's a, you know, C.H. Douglas and the social credit people.
Yeah.
All right. He was a leading advocate of that, and he attempted to discredit mathematically perfected economy like Griffin by saying that interest didn't multiply debt in proportion to circulation. I used his own words to disprove him. And he's, you know, I can't tell you how many, I've had several hundred people write me thanking me profusely for embarrassing, you know, William B. Ryan in such a thorough and permanent way. He was actually part of a plot to try and trap me into, you know, entering the social credit forums and being blasted by hundreds of adversaries for weeks. I mean, thousands of emails I answered. And in the end, proved them all wrong in every case in a gentlemanly way until I finally told them all to take a long walk on a short pier. But anyway, the only thing that really anybody's tried to do is discredit this idea that any purported economy subject to interest inevitably terminates itself under insoluble debt. And they try and state the mechanics in some slightly different way that they assert won't come up with this failure. So let's just jump to G. Edward Griffin as an example. You know, I had hoped to support Ron Paul in the 2008 presidential campaign. In fact, I totally revised my website to do so, rewrote hundreds of pages, and then was forced to do otherwise. I've had people since approximately 1980 trying to put me and Ron Paul together. Ron Paul has never answered me one time.
Yeah.
So, and the reason is his own people have thoroughly plagiarized my work. You know, they've made many copies of papers which are my original theses.
Ron Paul doesn't really. He claims to be an Austrian, doesn't he? He doesn't claim his own work.
Yeah, he boasts that he's an Austrian economist, and of course, he never follows the pattern of a legitimate theorist. That is, you know, if you want to save a people from
gone pretty deep into promoting the Austrian economics, it's gonna be a major decision for him to turn that around now.
That's true. That's true, but he's doing it. In fact, G. Edward Griffin is a perfect example of it. If you go on any of the Ron Paul forums, you'll find, you know, going way back, you'll find posts about mathematically perfected economy. You'll find people that ask me to go to those forums to resolve an issue. And there's certain individuals who are as much as trolls, but more like trolls who control the forums, and I can give explicit names, who merely in the end, you know, after you carefully provide these explanations of how interest is inevitably terminal, as we've gone through this in more casual way, but still, if you take all of the explanation that we've already covered here,